Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Cohn with Indiewire. Thanks so much for being here. And for those of you who came out for Spotlight earlier, we apologize that the talent couldn't make it out. But if you come tomorrow at noon, I'll be recording our weekly podcast, Screen Talk, here live with Ann Thompson. And I hear she does a killer John Slattery impersonation, so you won't want to miss that. No, seriously, we're going to talk about that movie, all kinds of other different things going on at Toronto, and we'll open it up for questions so you can be a part of the podcast, and you can complain about things. We'll have a little debate. It'll be a lot of fun. But we're really thrilled to close out this series of conversations with ANOMALISA today, and we want to thank Toronto for working with us to set it up, because this is truly one of the more incredible fiction films that I've seen this year. In American cinema, there are a few names more distinctive than Charlie Kaufman's, and even though there are certain expectations that the work has created, he never ceases to surprise us, and this is a terrific example of that. It's a stop-motion animated film with a co-director, Duke Johnson, that started as a radio play, so it's got this fascinating backstory, and we're going to dig into all of that with the three guests we have here. So please join me in welcoming co-directors Charlie Kaufman and Duke Johnson, and producer Rosa Tran. So first of all, congratulations. You're fresh from Venice, where you won a big prize there. So it's a nice way to show up in Canada, right? Before we get into where the movie's at right now, let's go back a couple of years, maybe I guess 10 years to the origins of this project as a radio play. Charlie, can you walk us through that a little bit? How did you decide to tell this story in its original format, and what motivated you to turn it into a film?
Carter Burwell had approached the Coen brothers and me. He was asked to do a performance of his musical scores in London. He wasn't interested in doing that. He thought if he could write new scores and have little stage plays, that would be more fun for him. So the idea that we came up with was this idea of a sound play, and the sound play was, actors on stage with musicians and Carter conducting, and a Foley artist, and we would have no visuals, and the audience would, in their minds, create the visuals for the thing. So I had written one and directed it, and the Coens had written one and directed theirs, and we did it in New York, and we did it in London, and then we were going to take it to Los Angeles, and the Coens had a scheduling conflict, so we had one less play than we needed. So I wrote a second play, which turned out to be ANOMALISA, and the thinking in both plays that I wrote was I wanted to do something that could exist in an interesting way as a sound play. And so the idea of having one actor playing many, many parts when it's conspicuous because the actor's standing on stage that it's only one actor was kind of a way into the idea. And so that's where it came from initially.
So let's talk about when the rest of you guys got involved. Rosa, when did you first start to get involved in turning this into a movie?
I got involved when Duke got a hold of the script, and he came to me one day and said, "Do you want to work on this Charlie Kaufman movie with me?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." And so we just started, the Kickstarter. We worked on the Kickstarter video together, and then from then on, just about 3 years, we've been working on this together.
It certainly looks like it. Now, Duke, you come from a TV background, and obviously you've done stop-motion animation before, and one of the credits that's been cited a lot is the stop-motion episode of Community. But this is a totally different beast, obviously, and the 3 years of production speaks to that. So what did you make of it when you first encountered this project, and how did your sort of expectations evolve from there?
Well, yeah, I'd been working in animated television, but I went to film school at NYU and grad school at AFI, and I studied like traditional live action filmmaking. And I was a big fan of Charlie's, and I actually started working in animation kind of by accident. I made a live action thesis film in grad school, and I invited a friend of mine, which ultimately ended up being a mutual friend of ours, a man named Dino Stamatopoulos, but I invited a friend to the screening of the thesis film, and he offered to let me direct an episode of his animated TV show, Moral Oral. And, you know, I was just out of grad school, and I was glad to have the opportunity to direct something. And so we started working together, and I did an episode of Moral Oral. It took a couple of years of sort of like hanging around the studio and learning the process and stuff. And we hit it off, and we ended up doing other stuff together, other series. And then Dino's friend, Dan Harmon, was doing an episode of Community and stop motion, and I was kind of the go-to director for that because we'd worked together for so long, Dino and I. And so we actually started this new studio in Burbank called Starburns Industries to produce that episode of Community. And we ended up working there for a couple of years doing stop motion, and then finally there was a lull in the studio, and we were looking for something new to produce, and Dino had mentioned that he had a copy of this Charlie Kaufman script. And it was just like, you know, for an aspiring filmmaker, it's like, that's the sentence that you want to hear more than anything else. You know, it's like, I have this Charlie Kaufman script. I was like, well, yeah, let's do that for sure. So I read it, and it was, you know, every bit as wonderful as it was in my dreams, you know. And we approached Charlie about letting us do it, and he said, yeah, you know, if you guys can come up with the money, or you can find the money, then we can do it. So that's when we started exploring, you know, options to get the money to make the film. And somebody mentioned Kickstarter, and it was kind of new at the time. And so we tried it out, and we made a Kickstarter video, and that's how it all started.
So Charlie, how did working in animation differ from your other experiences with live action?
One of the things about animation that's really different is that it's kind of really front-loaded. You know, everything has to be figured out beforehand. It's not done, and you know, it's not figured out in the editing process afterwards. You know, you record the actors' voices, and then you put together an animatic, which is just basically drawings in the form timed out in the form of the film. You know, and you work from that. And you know, because the budget was so tight, we pretty much had to do everything in one take. It's not like working with actors where you're, you know, it's like, doesn't work out, you try it again. Obviously, there's no input from the puppets. You know, you're not interacting with them. You know, sometimes if the hours are long, you think you are, but you're really not. You know, but the animators are in essence like actors, and they bring so much to the process, and so much, so many ideas, and obviously so much skill. So, but it's slow. You know, the animators were doing 2 seconds per person, about 2 seconds a day. So you know, it took 2 years of production to do this film. So it's very, you know, as opposed to a month or 28 days, which is my experience.
And yet it doesn't feel like anything was sort of any kind of struggle. I mean, the movie moves along at a very swift pace. It's only 80 minutes long. I think people who know your work may come into it expecting something more sort of challenging, but it's actually a very accessible film in a lot of ways. And I know you don't like to discuss the meaning of your work, but I would like to ask you about the tone, because it's so specific. It's warm on one level, dealing with this kind of alienated guy who's traveling around, goes through this series of experiences over the course of a night and a day. But at the same time, he's dealing with certain anxieties about his life. So how did you kind of envision that tone from the get-go?
I mean, I think it helped that this was done as a play with actors in 2005. It's actually 10 years ago, almost exactly, September of 2005, that we did it. So, I mean, I worked out a lot of stuff when I was working with the actors. The tone, I mean, I think when we recorded the voices for this, we made it much more intimate because it's not a stage play, so it's not sort of presentational, it's quiet, but I knew what the story was, you know. So I'm not sure if that's answering your question, or is it answering your question?
Well, it's a start. I mean, the other piece of the equation is there's a very unique device in this movie involving the voice acting. There's only 3 voice actors, and one of them, Tom Noonan, voices most of the characters. Yeah. can you tell us a little bit about where that device came from and sort of what it was like to construct a story around it?
Well, like I had said earlier, I mean, the idea came from trying to figure out, well, what's an interesting way to present 3 actors on stage and have the conceit contradict in the audiences, the thing that you're watching contradict what they're seeing. So that was where it came from. It's lent itself in my mind to something of a kind of an existential situation for the other character, the other male character in there. It just seemed, again, without, really going into why why the idea was chosen, because I don't want to explain that, because I think that's for the audience to experience, but it seemed to lend itself to some idea I had about something in the way people interact. If that's not general enough for people, I'll try again.
It's a good starting point. I mean, Duke entering into this, I mean, the work was already there. Some of the themes were already in place. But you are a co-director on this project, so what was it like to kind of figure out what Charlie was going for and build your own side of it into that equation?
Well, it's interesting because, yeah, the play had been done, but I approached it, my first interaction with the piece was reading a screenplay. And, I imagine just like any good screenplay, I mean, everything was there. Like, I got it. I understood what the characters were struggling with, and it certainly had a feeling and had a tone. And I started, visualizing it in my mind, and then Charlie and I would just talk about, I mean, the main thing of transitioning this from a stage play or a screenplay or anything else to a movie is, how do you visualize these themes and these concepts, and what does it feel like? What is the tone of the movie as opposed to, this stage performance that happened, many years ago? So those are the conversations that we started having in the beginning. But also the very first thing that we did was record the actors. And that kind of set the tone for everything. When they came in, obviously they had done the play, but the play was a different thing. It was a live performance, and they were sitting on a stage in front of an audience, and here they are. Suddenly they're on the Warner Brothers lot, like in a sound stage, sitting in chairs with lights and scripts facing each other, and just like reading into a microphone. And there was a little bit of an adjustment there. We did a rehearsal day, and then they started acting, and there was a moment when it kind of clicked, and it kind of became this new thing. It felt different. It felt like it wasn't a stage play anymore, because a stage play it's a live thing. It's an interaction with an audience. It's sort of a living experience, and recording the voices for the movie was a different experience. You do different takes, you do alternate takes, you stop and start, and it has a different feel and a different experience. And I think we sort of discovered what that was when we were doing it. It kind of became something, and then we were like, oh, okay, this is what it is. Does that make sense?
I just want to add something. This was, when I wrote it, it was designed not to be seen. There are things in there that were supposed to be ambiguous and unseen. So when Duke and I started working together, I think the first big problem, or at least for me, because I had some reticence about how it would translate, was to try to figure out, now that these things had to be concrete, what they were, what we could settle on, what would work for the movie. And that was, I think, our first big conversation that we had.
So Duke, what do you think the movie's about? Can you do that when he's here?
Yeah, Duke.
Well, and it's an interesting question. I mean,
I am sitting right here.
No, but
so
I mean,
it feels like
I don't think it's about, like, you don't say, well, this is about something. It's like, I don't think that you can even describe it that way. I mean, there's certain things you can say, well, it's about a guy that's struggling with connecting with people or something. But if you say that, that's only one, that's like one peel of the onion. I think what's amazing about, for me, what's amazing about Charlie's writing is it's really specific. I mean, it's a story about specific characters that feel specific and individual and unique. But anybody can read that script or watch this movie and relate to it. All different types of people, people who are a middle-aged white guy, like the main character, or a teenage female or whatever. I mean, people, they watch this and they relate to, because they're seeing this human experience. And I think my experience with the movie, what I got out of it, what I got out of reading the screenplay was very real and very authentic, but also kind of unique to me. And I'm sure Charlie, when he was writing it, was drawing from experiences that were unique to him or whatever. But it's like we have our own experience, but they're also universal.
That worked for you, Charlie?
It was really good. No, it was really good. I'm serious.
Rosa, what were some of the logistical challenges as a producer keeping such a unique project ongoing for so much time, especially because so few people really knew what this movie was from the outside?
We had every problem. Any problem and every problem you could imagine. Anything went wrong, everything went wrong. And it was just, at a certain point, we had so many problems, we were just standing there and you're kind of numb to it all. And you just accept it and then just roll with it. But, we'd have problems with the 3D printer. We'd come back from Christmas break and the printer did not print any usable faces for 2 months. And so the animators are on stage and we're trying to get our face pieces to them, and another tray comes out, 40 pieces. One piece works off of that. And so it's just trying to really prioritize all of your problems and then just trying to figure out which one is the most important. And these guys are so understanding and helpful. And so they just kind of lend a hand along the way. But, those problems, time, money, the usual stuff.
How about distribution?
Yeah, we're working on it now.
Working on it?
Yeah.
So before we go to questions from the audience, one thing I'd like to ask Charlie about is, it's obviously it was worth the effort to do this because we get another great film with your name attached to it. And, it goes without saying that it's been a little while since the last one. Now, a lot of people, I think, would assume that, you won an Oscar, people know your work, you've worked with some of the great actors of our time, that should give you carte blanche to do all kinds of different stuff. How do you explain these kinds of gaps and the sort of challenges you have making the movies that you want to make?
I mean, I don't know how to explain it other than I've been trying to get stuff going. I've written a bunch. I've written 3 screenplays in the last 7 years. I've written 3 pilots. I produced and directed one of them that didn't go to series. I don't know. It's, how do I know? I think the business became really hard for everybody in 2008, which is when Synecdoche came out, and then I think it, was, I think if things aren't perceived as having commercial potential, that there's really no place in the business for them. I mean, this movie, which happened in the midst of this, we've been working on this for 3 years, since 2012, only happened because it happened outside of the system. Only. It never would have happened. If I had gone in the sort of the conventional route and tried to pitch this as a thing, no way. So this turned out to be really, fortuitous. Going in, I had no idea, but it was great to work with Rosa and Duke and all of these people, and for me, and I think we have something that nobody made any decisions about creatively except for us, and we have something that we're proud of, and I feel very fortunate that it happened.
Thank you, Kickstarter. So let's open it up to audience questions. We have microphones going around, so just make sure you get the mic before you ask your question. It looks like we have one up here.
I was just wondering what about the story, what unique about the story made you want to make it stop motion? What was like the thought process?
Is that for Duke or for
Or
me?
for, well, either one of you, or however that came about. That
I mean,
conversation.
I can sort of try to answer for both, and if not, then Duke, you can correct me. I think what happened was that they made stop motion movies at this company, Stop Motion TV, and they'd come to me. That's what they did, and you know, I had no objection to it being in stop motion. I had an objection to it being anything at first because I didn't think it was a visual thing, and that shouldn't be. But you know, when Duke and I started talking about what it would be, it seemed to really make sense. But I think that came after. I don't know if you've seen the movie. So yeah, I mean, I think there are things that, I mean, and you know, and then it started to work itself organically into the storytelling, and I think that a lot of the sort of ideas and themes in this story ended up really lending themselves to this process. I think it gives it a dreamlike quality, a kind of a surreal quality, and I think the stuff that is very sort of simple about being in a hotel, you know, that it becomes sort of, for us anyway, becomes sort of the process of watching it becomes heightened because it's stop motion, you know, the sort of mundane stuff, which is part of the story. I don't know, did you want to add anything to that?
I just read it as a script, and I didn't know that it was a play before that, and I hadn't experienced it as a play. So when I read the script, to me it made sense. I could see it as a stop motion movie. I mean, nothing visual was described in the script, which was interesting. But you know, I just thought it would be an interesting challenge, and I could see sort of thematically how it would translate to the medium. And then it wasn't until we started talking that it was like, okay, but what is that specifically? And having to figure that out was the biggest challenges that we faced. But you know, it was a fun challenge.
Yeah, and how we would portray all of these characters, you know, was something that in the stage thing we didn't have to do, and in this one we had, and that became a big conversation, and you know, fun in a way. Scary, but fun.
Other questions from the audience or anybody up here?
Thanks. Just on the producing side, I'm wondering, besides having obviously Charlie's name attached to the Kickstarter, what are some things that you saw that made that Kickstarter successful for you?
I think aside from Charlie's name, we had, you know, Dan and Dino, you know, and they did those. What is it? Kickstarting it with Dan and Dino update videos. Those were pretty great. Having that star power. I think we were really, you know, didn't know what we were getting into, so we printed 15,000 postcards and, you know, went down to Comic-Con, backpacks, and we were standing on corners and handing out these cards, and people were kicking us out of everywhere. And we were already getting backed. It was out there, you know. It was more popular than we could have ever imagined. And that kind of happened organically. I think you know, I think back on it, and on the last couple of days, I had this idea. You always get these ideas afterwards, that I would, if I had to do it over again, on the last 24 hours, I would have put Dan and Dino on a live stream and done it like a telethon, and had people come in and like bring in their friends, like David Cross, whoever was in town, you know, Jay Johnston, Scott Adsit, come in and talk about, do a little skit, do something, and make it like a 24-hour telethon like back in the day. But, you know, that's hindsight's always 2020.
You have to do it for the next film. Did you have awards that you're still delivering on for backers?
We haven't delivered any. We've delivered our Skypes and our studio tours and things like that, but unfortunately, without distribution, we can't release any of our rewards yet.
One step at a time. Yeah. Other audience questions? We still have time for a few more.
Hey, Charlie, I'm a big fan, and I was doing some reading. I found out you worked on the Dana Carvey show at one point. And apparently some of the stuff you wrote was so outside the box that the powers that be didn't let it end up being some of the skits at the time. Very curious to know what some of those might be. But also, just tying it to kind of where today is at, with things like Kickstarter, is it becoming easier for writers to not have to think so commercially? Wondering if you could kind of speak to both those.
Well, I mean, as for the first part, I don't know that my sketches were outside the box. I mean, they might have been. I think they just weren't often chosen. But yeah, that's where I met Dino, who is the person who, is a partner in this studio that got this thing going. And as far as Kickstarter, you're saying promoting non-commercial work. Is that the idea that you're asking about? I mean, I do think that this, like I said, I feel like that seed money really started this process. I mean, it came, from people excited about the prospect of seeing this movie, and I don't think it would have happened any other way. So that was good for us.
Over here.
I have a question for Charlie. You mentioned in 2008 that the business became tough for filmmakers and writers. And I definitely know that there are other artists, writers and directors who are having a tough time getting things made now with their artistic vision, and they've had success in the past. Where do you think that the business is going to go from here as far as for, pure artists, maybe not looking for commercial success, but just they're getting their ideas out there and getting things made?
I mean, I don't really know a lot about it, and I don't have any grand theories. I just know that, the studios are not making, low or medium budget movies, and they're making these giant superhero things, and those are the things that they do. And so, I don't know. I mean, I think if the other things don't find audiences and don't make money, then it's very hard for finance people to invest in them. And I guess people can make stuff on their own with their iPhones or whatever, and I guess that's happening. But I don't have any expertise in that. I mean, I don't know anything about it, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
Anyone else? One more. We'll squeeze it in.
I think a lot of your work, Charlie, kind of captures human emotion in such a raw way that I feel like is lost in a lot of bigger Hollywood productions and everything. And I was wondering, if you think that is because of just consumerism, like the way, like the audience, is that a problem with the audience or with producers, or how important is that to you?
I mean, how important is it? To me, it's really important, but I mean, I don't know if it's a problem. It seems to me like it's a circular problem, in that, people who make movies see things that do well, and then they continue to make those things because they continue to do well, and then that becomes this sort of cycle, and everything else becomes excluded from that. And then when you start making these giant movies that cost, $100 million and more, then they have to do really well. And if that's what you're doing, if that's what you're making, then they have to be really, I think they have to be really conventional, because no one is going to spend that kind of money on something that they don't have a kind of a certainty that's going to do well. And if you make a superhero movie that looks like it should do well and doesn't do well, you don't get fired for it. But if you make a movie that no one thinks is going to do well, and you take a chance and it doesn't do well, you don't have a job anymore. So everybody's running scared. And I think it sucks, I think it sucks for audiences. I think it sucks for filmmakers. And I think it's an unfortunate thing for our society, because I think people are not being fed anything that's substantial, you know?
Well, fortunately, this movie does exist, and it's playing at the festival, and hopefully we'll have a nice long life. So this is a nice way to kind of segue into that on that uplifting note. Thanks so much for
Thank
being
you
here,
very much.
guys.
Thank you very much.